Awesome. All right. So where we're going to kick off, we're at the very bottom of page 65, and it's the very, very bottom paragraph. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little bit of review just to cover what we've spoken about so far. And where we're at is step 4. And we're right in the middle of resentments. And what's really cool about where we're at in the book is we're really at a place where the whole process turns, the whole program changes, and that whole vision that I have for life and the world, it begins to change and shift, and it is incredible. But we got to do some prep work before we get into that fourth column of freedom. So what is the prep work that I need? So what I need is I need a notebook. It's always good to get a notebook. This is a good paper size. I always make the joke A4 is a good paper size. There are other paper sizes, and I know some of them, which means I'm cool, and I have a lot of friends. Yeah, you're like, yeah, you have friends. Thank you. And so this is a great size notebook to get. Get a notebook, get a pen. And this is one of my little page sneaky tricks. Get a pen that you like writing with. It doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money, but get a pen that you like writing with. You know, if you like those fine tips, get a fine tip. If you like an inky pen, get an inky pen. Just a little thing that makes it a little easier. And before we do any writing on the 4th step, what are we going to do? Well, I always find it helpful to say a prayer. So I always want to start with a prayer, and that prayer could be anything that you want. You could utilize any prayer that you want, but prayers that I like to say are things like, God, I pray that you would direct and guide me as I go through this 4-step inventory today. I pray that you would be with me during this process, and that you would guide my heart, my mind, and my pen. Be with me as I seek to see the truth. Something like that. And then we're going to write. And whenever we are done writing, a wonderful spiritual action to take is to pray, is to say a prayer. And you can use any prayer that you want to use, any prayer that you want to say. But it could be something like, Dear God, please help me to leave the thoughts and the feelings and the emotions of this step 4 contained within the pages of this notebook. I pray that you would allow me to go out into the world to be of love and service to you and the people about me. Thank you, God. Something like that. That's some hypothetical prayers that you can say. And then what do we got to do? Well, we got to draw some lines. And what's the joke I always make? We weren't afraid of doing lines before. And just like before, can't do too many lines. So what we're going to do is we're going to rock and roll with the lines. So how we're going to do it is we're going to do, and there are different ways of setting up the page. I'm not saying this is the only way, but this is a way that I've found that is really effective, but not very environmentally friendly. So I'm going to draw one line across the page to split it in half horizontally, and then 2 lines from that horizontal line up. And what that does is that creates 3 columns on top and one nice big bottom that we're going to be talking about. Oh, that was an inappropriate metaphor that I didn't mean to, or a pun that any focus. The bottom paragraph, or the bottom column. Ooh, it is like big bottom. I'm like, oh, that's not appropriate. Focus. A big column at the bottom right here. And so we're going to do that. We're going to do that on 50 pages, 100 pages. Just like before, we can't draw too many lines. And I want you to know that there is spiritual value in drawing the lines and putting pen to paper on the lines. There's spiritual value in doing that. And once we've gotten those lines down, pen to paper, what we're going to do is we're going to work one column at a time. So first, I'm going to share the screen so just so you guys can see it. And so what we're going to do is we are going to start with column 1. And column 1 is just going to be a name of a person or a principal or an institution with whom we resent. So what we're going to do is we're going to write down, typically mom, flip the page, then dad, flip the page, then the X, flip the page, then the other X. And then maybe we're going to resent an institution. Maybe it's AA, flip the page, CA, flip the page. Maybe it's my rehab, flip the page, or my sober living, flip the page. Or principles. Maybe I resent that I have to write inventory. Maybe I resent God. This is where we put those God resentments. Maybe I resent having to be willing. Maybe I resent having to make amends. Maybe I resent having to sponsor others. Whatever it is. And the biggest thing in column 1 is that we don't edit ourselves. If a name comes to mind, we write it down. There's absolutely no harm in writing down a name of a person or an institution or a principal and finding out, I didn't really have that big of a resentment. No big deal. What happens is I wasted maybe 10 minutes of my time in total. but I got more experience with writing inventory and more experience that I get to use to help another person. But if I don't write it down, you see, it talks about how resentment is the #1 offender. So from resentment stem all forms of spiritual disease, right? And so resentment kills more alcoholics than anything else. So don't self-edit. And when I've gotten a whole bunch of names down, one at a time, name, flip the page, name, flip the page, name, flip the page, I go back to the front of the book and I start on column 2. And column 2 comes from the bottom of 64. We ask ourselves why we're angry. And what I want to do is I want to be as petty as I really am. I always joke, this is the only place in the step work where you can write, you can use the C word. You don't get to use it anywhere else, but the most inappropriate swear, you can use it right here. Point form, petty, and just write it down. And the reason I emphasize point form is I don't need to get into story. I don't need to overwhelm myself. I just need to put it down. And so I do one column 2 at a time. Why am I angry at mom? Flip the page. Why am I angry at dad? Flip the page. Why am I angry at the ex? Flip the page. Why am I angry at the other ex? Flip the page. Why am I resentful at AA? Flip the page. Why am I resentful at being willing? Flip the page. And I go on and so on and so forth. And when I've gotten all my column 2s done, what I do is I get into my 3rd column. My 3rd column is the effects column. And where I get it from is the top of page 65, where it says on our grudge list. We set opposite each name our injuries. And so what am I writing? If the resentment affected my self-esteem, which is how I feel about myself, I write down self-esteem. That's it. There's other ways to do it and to go in more in detail, but just for how I like to do it, keep it simple, self-esteem. If it affects my ambition, which is my desire to go out and do things in the future, I write down ambition. If it affects my security. Now, we broke security into 3 types of security. My physical security. So if it threatened my health, my well-being, my physical safety, I can write physical security. My emotional security is my capacity to feel emotionally safe. If it made me feel emotionally unsafe, I write down emotional security. And if the resentment or the situation led me to, if it affected my finances, my employment, they stole from me, they took things from me, I can say financial security. I can write that down. And my personal relations, did this resentment affect my relationships with other human beings, platonic people, And did it affect my sex relations, my relationships with those that I'm romantically or sexually connected with? And if so, I write sex relations. And what I find is the deeper the resentment, the more areas of my life that are affected. Another way to say it is that the more areas of my life that are affected, the deeper the resentment. And the more that I have in my column 3, the more that I need to be free of this resentment, because it's affecting all these areas of my life. Now, if you're like, girl, you were going through that real quick, I know it's review. So if you're missing anything, or actually, if anyone ever has any questions at any point, feel free to put them in the chat. I really will respond to questions, and I will go on tangents, and we'll have a lot of fun. And next week, when we get into fears, we're gonna have some participation. So let's go back into the book and let's pop down to the very, very bottom of page 65. Now, you might have noticed if you were here last week that we didn't read the example where it says we're usually as definite as this example. We are going to skip over that, but we are going to come back to that. We're going to figure out what that 4th column just might look for this inventory. And that's when we're going to read it, because I think it's fun. So very bottom, page 65. We went back through our lives. So it's not just my drinking career. It is my whole life. Nothing counted but thoroughness and honesty. So I can look at the work that I've done so far, column 1, column 2, column 3. Have I been thorough? Do I have a lot of things written down? Have I been honest with the things in me that I'm holding those refeeling of negative emotions around? Thoroughness and honesty. When we were finished, we considered it carefully. You can ask yourself, is this not your experience? I love this, because this is the book meeting us where we're at. It says, the first thing apparent was that this world and its people were often quite wrong. You know what I mean? Column 1, the jerk. Column 2, how they were a jerk to me. Column 3, how their jerkiness affected me. Yeah, column 1, 2, 3. It's all about how they suck. And yeah, that was my experience. The world and its people, quite wrong. Absolutely. And so the book is going to meet us where we're at and take us where we need to go. It says to conclude that others were wrong was as far as most of us ever got. That isn't my experience, that I typically didn't get farther than that. When it came to looking at resentments or things that had hurt me, I stopped right there with where they hurt me and how they hurt me and how it made me feel. It says the usual outcome was that people continued to wrong us and we stayed sore. Sore is just another way or another word to say hurt. Sometimes it was remorse, and then we were sore at ourselves, falling into self-pity and self-hatred. Was that my experience? But the more we fought and tried to have our own way, the worse matters got. And there's a subtle callback to the third step. You know, the actor playing the director, trying to rest, which is wrestle, satisfaction, and happiness. You know, the more that I try to get my way, the worse these problems in life seems to go for me and the people I care about. I don't know. I'm sure that's just my experience. I'm sure no one else relates to that. And it says, as in war, the victor only seemed to win. Our moments of triumph were short-lived. Just like in war, the victor, you know, gets the spoils, but at what cost? Do you know what I mean? There is wreckage, not just to the other side, but to ourselves. There is wreckage. And that is what it is like when I live with resentment. Wreckage to my life and wreckage to the lives of those around me and innocent victims. Collateral damage. Is that not my experience? And you know what's interesting is this next paragraph, what we're going to start talking about is not alcoholics and not drug addicts and not people with compulsive behaviors that leads them to all-inclusive big book studies like this one. What we're talking about with the first few sentences of this paragraph is any human being. So it says, it is plain that a life, any life, a human being's life, which includes deep resentment, leads only to futility and unhappiness. And yeah, futility is what I'll put in the chat. It's that uselessness, purposelessness. You know, that feeling that life is meaningless. What's the point of all this? Is that not my experience? And it says, to the precise extent that we permit these, that we allow ourselves to have resentments, do we squander? Squander is to waste the hours that might have been worthwhile. And that is any human being. You know, we have, you know, friends, family, loved ones, you know, maybe some loved ones who want to keep a bit of a distance that have deep resentment, that are not alcoholic or not addicted or not compulsive in their addictive behaviors. And this is their experience too. Their life is one of futility and unhappiness. And they squander, they waste the hours of their life that might have been worthwhile. We all know that person that's miserable and holding on to a resentment decades old that's eating them alive. But this is information for us. So that's how destructive resentments are for anyone. But this is for people like us. It says, but with the alcoholic, whose hope is the maintenance and growth of a spiritual experience. See, that spiritual experience, that's not like a one and done. That is something that I need to maintain and that I need to grow. Man, it's almost as though this whole thing is a way of life. That's news. It's not like I've been saying that. Yeah, utility is use and usefulness. Absolutely. So with the alcoholic whose hope is the maintenance and growth, and maintenance is not fun, by the way. If y'all, I don't drive, but if y'all have a car, you're not excited about car maintenance, but growth, man, that is exciting. We get to not just maintain, but we get to grow. And that's what we're called to do, grow in this connectedness with a power greater than ourselves. So, but with the alcoholic whose hope is the maintenance and growth of a spiritual experience, this business of resentment is infinitely grave, which means fatal. It is infinitely fatal. There is no limit to the level of how fatal it is for people like me. People like me who say, that's it, I can never drink or use drugs ever again, and I find myself doing it again. That is what that means. Infinitely grave. And if you're like, you know what, Paige, I don't believe you. You might trust Rob more with the definitions. Fair enough. But even if you didn't trust Rob and you're like, absolutely not, I don't know if that's what that means. Don't worry. The next lines, it's got us. It says, we found that it is fatal. Fatal. So we're saying it the same way. We're saying it twice in different ways. We're really emphasizing somebody like me cannot survive holding on to resentment. And here is why it is fatal. It says, for when harboring such feelings, so we're holding on to these feelings of resentment, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the Spirit, capital S. The insanity of alcohol returns and we drink again. And with us, to drink is to die. And so what is the purpose? Why the heck are we doing this work in this fourth step? Well, what we're beginning to do in the fourth step is to see the things that are blocking me off from the sunlight of the Spirit. Those resentments, those defects of character. We're going to see our fears. We're going to see our guilt and shame in our relationship conduct. We're going to have a good look at that here in a bit. And we're beginning to see what they are so we can clear them away. That is what we're doing. And if I do not clear away the stuff inside of me that is blocking me from God, I will live in darkness. And the mental obsession, that insane thought that I have when I am sober that tells me I can drink again, it will come back and I will take a drink and I will die. And this is not a theory. This is the reality of those of us who have this illness. I need to be free of resentments. It is fatal. And what do I need more than anything else? Of course, what I need more than anything else is a connection with God. Power greater than myself, higher power, creator, spirit of the universe. That is what I need. Anything less than that, and I am going to drink again. That's what it's saying. And so it goes on, the insanity of alcohol returns and we drink again. And with us, to drink is to die. Why is to drink to die? Because we have the physical allergy and we cannot control the amount we take once we start to drink. And that insanity of alcohol returning is the mental obsession. And so again, I just want to point out, I get disconnected from God. I get a thought that tells me I can drink. I take the drink, the allergy takes me. That's what we're talking about. If we were to live, we had to be free of anger. Now, what this does not mean is that we are showing up like St. Paige, not angry about, listen, if you know me, you know I run a lot of inventory because I need to. Ain't no St. Paige over here. But like, we're not expected to be perfect. We will have resentments. That's why we have step 4. That's why we have step 10. That's why we have the evening review in step 11. That's why we have these things. I will not be perfect. None of us will. Well, maybe you guys will. I will not be perfect. Y'all are pretty great. I think you're pretty close to perfect. Just like giving compliments. But I am deeply flawed and frequently wrong. And so it says, if we were to live, we had to be free of anger. So it will be a continual having to get free of this anger. Not this magic, I don't have anger. We're trying, and actually, I almost got ahead of ourselves. It's got us. So the grouch and the brainstorm were not for us. Now, we might read brainstorm and think, what do you mean? Like, I can't come up with creative ideas? And fair enough, a lot of us have a little bit of that analysis paralysis and are maybe subjected to some overthinking. But in the 1930s, the word brainstorm didn't mean just brainstorm this, have a little workshop. No, what that meant was a sudden outburst of anger. So grouch and that sudden outburst of anger was not for us. It says they may be the dubious luxury of normal men, but for alcoholics, these things are poison. And I'm sure many of us have heard that saying, that like a resentment is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die, and how true it is for those of us who what brings us here is alcohol. Anyone here ever drank out of resentment? Anyone ever had that, used that a resentment, like, F you, I'll show you, I will ruin my life. That'll teach you, that's what it's like. And so, awesome. So it says, we turned back to the list, for it held the key to the future. So the work that we've done, column 1, and then column 2, and then all of column 3, holds the key to the rest of our life. Also, there's a lot of work that we're going to do in this 4th column that's going to help us out with a whole bunch of the later steps and the later actions. It's beautiful how it flows. But oh man, it's hard not to get ahead of myself. But I will do my best to be patient. So it held the key to the future. We were prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle. So don't think of 360 because that's a circle, but a 180. We're going to look at this list from the complete opposite angle. So the angle we're looking at it at first is like this world and its people quite wrong. Now we're going to have a completely 180. Spoilers, I'm wrong. That's the angle. Sorry, I've just been spoiling things. Shakespeare, the Titanic movie, step 4, just spoilers all over the place. Rude of me. Don't worry, stick around. I'll teach all of us how we can make amends for it. You know what I mean? Alrighty. So it said, we began to see that the world and its people really dominated us. You know what I mean? Dominated. I'm dominated by these resentments, these hurts. And it says, in that state, the wrongdoings of others, fancied or real, had the power to actually kill. And what I want to talk about is 99%, 95, 98% of our resentments are fancied. You know what we're going to do? We're going to find out that 98% of them, you know, we assume we did nothing wrong, but 98% of them, we are going to see that we set the ball rolling. We're going to see where we stepped on their toes based on selfishness and self-centeredness, and they retaliated. We're going to see where we were the jerks. But there are cases where we really were hurt. Yeah, to dominate is control, govern, or rule by. And, you know, the ones that I'm really talking to or talking about or speaking about are things like childhood abuse. That's the stuff I'm talking about, you know, where we're genuinely the victim. And so just before we kind of even get into that fourth column, what I want to talk about is with those cases, because as soon as we get into that fourth column, if we have a history of that sort of stuff, what does our minds do? It's like, what about this, right? So I'm just going to answer it before we even get there. What about things like childhood abuse? What did 90% of our resentments, we're going to look like before the resentment. We're going to look at what we did before with things like childhood abuse, with things like, you know, that sort of where we are just truly the victim. We're looking at after. So just so you know what the fourth column often looks like when we're looking at things like that is things like I didn't seek help for it. I drank and used at it. I re-victimized myself with it. I used it as an excuse to hurt others. That's the angle that we take for that sort of stuff. But with 99% of them, I'm the jerk. Well, I might not be the jerk in yours, but I'm the jerk in mine. Well, I might be the jerk in yours. I don't know. Let's write inventory. Find out where I'm the jerk. All right. And so regardless of whether they are real or fancied, they have the power to actually kill. And I need to be free of them. Regardless of whether they are real or fancied, I will die if I do not get freedom from it. Again, I'm going to hold on to it. It's going to cut me off from God. And the mental obsession will be present and I will drink again. So it says, how could we escape? We saw that these resentments must be mastered. But how? We could not wish them away any more than alcohol. You know what's an interesting thing about that is I come to the first step and I realize that I am absolutely powerless over alcohol, drugs, whatever brings us to this study, that I cannot stop myself from taking the first drink or the first drug or the first whatever. I can't stop myself. I have no power against the mental obsession. And then we start to dive into the steps and I get to the third step and I see that what's fueling this is selfishness and self-centeredness because that cuts me off from God. And then it tells me I can't overcome that on my own power either. And we come to resentments and I come to see that I cannot overcome resentments based on self. I need God's help. That's what we're beginning to see. We're going to really let God work in our lives now. So it says, this was our course. So this is the direction. This is where we're going. This was our course. We realized that the people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick. Now, when we hear the word spiritually sick, I know there's people in sort of like modern language, modern, it's like sick as in like weird or twisted. What we're talking about is the people that hurt us were hurting. The people that hurt us were suffering and perhaps some of the ways in which we have suffered. That's what we're looking at. Though we did not like their symptoms, which if you're wondering what their symptoms are, that's column 2. And it says, and the way these disturbed us, that's column 3. So their stupid symptoms, column 2. The disturbance, how I was affected, column 3. They, like ourselves, were sick too. Now, as we get into the fourth column, we're going to use that line, they like ourselves were sick too, as a prompt to help open up that fourth column. And this is something I picked up in Ontario. So all those Ontarianians, hey, who absolutely love being called Ontarianians, never had a complaint from that. Just shenanigans. And then it says, we asked. And any time in this book it says we ask, what is that? That's a prayer. So yeah, exactly. So what we're going to do before we write on our each and every one of our resentments, we're going to say a prayer for them. So before I get into the fourth column, I say the prayer. And this is the prayer. It says, we ask God to help us show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. And I keep the prayer going, but I'm going to break it down. So we ask God. So oftentimes we hear things like, well, you pray for them. We're going to notice that on the page 67 prayer, the resentment prayer, we're not praying for them. We're praying that we see them in a new light. And it says, when it says we ask God to help us show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience. I had a sponsee one time that asked me, hey, what pity? Because again, in our modern, 2024, I did have to look at the calendar. In our modern 2024 language, pity is a bit condescending. Pity means, oh, I feel bad for you. You know what I mean? But I looked it up in my 1930s dictionary, and pity, not Rob's cool one, my super uncool one. Yeah, actually, you should have just let Rob. Rob's got it, but I looked it up too because I like the dictionary, because I'm fun at parties and have lots of friends. But in my 1930s dictionary, pity means to have sympathy with distress, also compassion. So we're asking God to help us show them that same sympathy and compassion, that understanding, right? That we would cheerfully, which is a direction, cheerfully, with cheer, with glee, with joy, grant a sick friend. And then it says, when a person offended, we said to ourselves, this is a sick man. How can I be helpful to him? What a radical idea. I cannot stand this jerk, whether it's the jerk who has ruined my life, or the jerk that cut me off in traffic, or the jerk that's speaking too long at the meeting. How can I be helpful to him? And does that not tie back to that third step decision? I'm not running my life. I am working for God and others. I just love the sneaky third step tie-ins. Just little sneaky things. They're my jam. This is a sick man. How can I be helpful to him? And then this, God save me from being angry. Again, God is doing it. Taking away the stuff. God save me from being angry. Thy will be done. And I'll share with you how I say the prayer. Now, you'll notice I say it slightly out of order. That's just because I said it wrong when I was doing some inventory many years ago, and I can't say it right now. You know what I mean? So how I say it is, God, help me to show this person the same pity, patience, and tolerance that I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. This is a sick person. How can I be helpful to them? God, save me from being angry. Thy will, not mine, be done. And I'm going to say that before I do any writing on my column 4. And we're going to say that for each and every one of the resentments. So what's going to happen is I get column 1, column 2, column 3 done. And then what I like to do is, as we go through the book, we start kind of front to back. Do you know what I mean? So I write mom, I write, oh, awesome. If you're able to throw it in the chat, throw your question in the chat and I got you. Yeah, absolutely. We start with mom. Then I flip the page and I write dad, and then I flip the page, and then I write the X and I flip the page, and then I write AA, and then I flip the page and I write page telling me to put it in the chat. I'm just kidding. And I flip the page, right? And then I go to column 2 and I write mom, dad, and mom, flip the page, and I write on why I'm mad at dad, and I flip the page, and so on and so forth in column 3. But a helpful tip that I've found is, when I'm getting into column 4, to not start at the front of my book, but to start at the back. And the reason I find that to be a helpful tip is because, I don't know about you, have a look at your column 3s and have a look at, I'll answer your question just a sec. Sorry, that's the ADHD that I don't have. I'm like, question, I'm mid-sentence. I'm like, something else, what's happening? But the reason it's helpful to go back to front on column 4 is, if you have a look at your third column, you're going to find at the start of the book is a lot of your heavy hitters. A lot of the ones that I talk about having a full house. A lot of those ones that have those big, heavy resentments. And then it starts to, piddle down, smaller and smaller and smaller. And here's something just so you know, everyone has a big, heavy one or two near the end, because we were like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to write it. We write it near the end. But by and large, the ones at the back are a lot of the more nebulous ones, like I resent, the government, or I resent, having to be willing, or, it's more of those ones. So they're a lot easier. Or I resent Tim Hortons. That's a fun one to do. That's for the Canadians. I resent Dunkin' Donuts for the Americans. I don't know what coffee shop you have in England, but I'll learn. Or Thailand. Yeah. So, it's those are those easy ones. And the reason why it's helpful to start at the back and move our way to the front is a couple reasons. One, some of these resentments might require what I like to talk about is a little bit more spiritual elbow grease. And there's times where some additional prayer can be helpful, to bring in prayers like what we have on page 552. 552 is a great supplemental prayer, something to add that is not the directions on how we deal with resentments, but it can be helpful to add, those big ones that have been eating away at you, especially the ones that have been eating away at you most of your life, page 552. And part of the other reason is, again, there's other things that we can do, those big, heavy ones. I can bring in different meditative practices. Again, just as a supplementary extra elbow grease, things like the Ho'oponopono meditations, things like loving kindness, just those types of meditations to just bring God in a little bit more. And I'm going to answer the question, and then we'll keep going. So the question is, should we replace a sick man with the person's name? Yes, that's what I do. And I'll even do it with nebulous concepts. So let's say there's our home group, and let's say we're frustrated with our home group, and let's say our home group is a really creative and unique name, like home group. I don't know. I'm doing it on, or the government. Yeah. So how would I say it if I resented my home group, whose name is home group? I would say, God help me to show home group the same tolerance, pity, and patience that I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. Home group is a sick group. How can I be helpful to it? God save me from being angry, thy will not mine be done. Let's say government. And let's say it's a certain political party. So God help me to show this political party the same tolerance, the same pity, patience, and tolerance that I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. This political party is a sick group. How can I be helpful to them? God save me from being angry, thy will not mine be done. And let's say it's something like willingness. God help me to show willingness, the same tolerance, pity, and patience that I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. Willingness is a sick concept. How can I be helpful to it? God save me from being angry, thy will, not mine, be done. Hopefully that kind of helps how we can, rock and roll. And just real quick, just because it is in the book and it might be helpful for certain people, I'll very quickly cover page 552. And again, it is just some supplementary ones that can be really, really helpful for those big, heavy resentments. And it's on page 552. It's a story of a woman who, she had this terrible, and by terrible, I mean that resentment that was just eating her up. You know what I mean? And it talks about how, she didn't know how she was going to be free of it. And she sees this article. It says the word resentment, and it says in the article, he said in effect, if you have resentment you want to be free of, if you will pray for the person or the thing that you resent, you will be free. If you will ask in prayer for everything you want for yourself to be given to them, you will be free. You'll notice you will be free, you will be free. And then we're going to see it again. You will be free. But that's a direction. What do I want for myself? Whether it's I want my team to win the sports, whether it's I want, I want peace, I want serenity, I want happiness, I want sobriety. I pray for that for them. And so that's for their health, their prosperity, their happiness, and you will be free. Even when you don't really want it for them, and your prayers are only words, and you don't mean it. Sounds like that person was dealing with alcoholics, though, because that sounds like directions for drugs. I don't want to do it, and I don't mean it, and my prayers are only words, and this is what my sponsorship looks like. It's go ahead and do it anyways. That's okay. Do it anyways, Do it every day for 2 weeks. And you'll find that you have come to mean it and to want it for them. And you will realize that where you used to feel bitterness, resentment, and hatred, you now feel compassionate, understanding, and love. It has worked for me then, and it has worked for me many times since. And it will work for me every time I'm willing to work it. Sometimes I have to ask first for the willingness, which is a prayer, praying for willingness, which is a theme in this book, but it too always comes. And because it works for me, it will work for all of us. As another great man says, the only real freedom a human being can ever know is doing what you ought to do because you want to do it. And if you're wondering who that great man is, that's Chuck Chamberlain, who wrote a book called A New Pair of Glasses. And that is just an additional supplementary prayer. That is not the resentment prayer. So what we're going to do is we're going to start, how I do it with my sponsees is I start them at the back of their resentments and we move toward the front. And that also helps us to pick up those, those patterns and to see, those ones where we're less defended, when we're able to see our patterns of behavior in that fourth column. So what I'm going to do is I'm always going to say the prayer and then I'm going to write on that fourth column. And now let's continue back on page 67. It says, we avoid retaliation or argument. We wouldn't treat sick people that way. If we do, we destroy our chance of being helpful. I'm called to be helpful. That's annoying. I was just hoping I could wish away the resentment. No, how can I be helpful? Now it says we cannot be helpful to all people, but at least God will show us how to take a kindly, tolerant view of each and every one. And God's doing the heavy lifting. I'm writing some pen to paper on the inventory, but God is doing the heavy lifting. So it says, referring to our list again, putting out of our minds the wrongs others have done. So we're no longer looking at them. We're no longer looking at what they've done. It says we resolutely looked for our own mistakes. That's what I'm looking for. What are my mistakes? And we've got two prompts that we're going to look at, but I'm going to take us through this paragraph, and then I'm going to describe how I like to do that fourth column from this book. So we look for our own mistakes. Where had we been? Selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened. And what can be helpful to know is it doesn't say had we been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened. It says where had we been, which means I want to assume that I had been and find it in each and every resentment. And man, that opens things up for us. Though a situation had not been entirely our fault, which the book is meeting us where we're at. It's like, hey, wait a minute, the situation wasn't entirely my fault. The book just told me to put out of my mind the wrongs that others had done. And already I'm like, hey, it's not all my fault. See, the book meets us with empathy and love and compassion. It says we tried to disregard the other person involved entirely. Where were we to blame? The inventory was ours, not the other man's. When we saw our faults, we listed them. We placed them before us in black and white. Now, I love the book and I follow directions, but here's my experience. And I'll be frank with you guys. I am a black ink sort of gal. Oh, I love my black ink, but you can stay sober if you use blue ink. You can. I've seen it happen. I mean, I got some sponsees that are wild. They use pencil. I'm like, what shenanigans is that? Yeah, shenanigans with the pencil. They use a pencil and they stay sober. So and listen, I think I've had some sponsees that use multicolored ink. I definitely have. Now I'm thinking about it. So the point is putting it down, not black and white, in the literal color of the ink. It says, we admitted our wrongs honestly and we're willing to set these matters straight. And what we're going to find is a lot of what we find in the fourth column prepares us for amends. And if I do my fourth column thoroughly, a lot of what I write in that fourth column, I can take it directly into the amends process. So I'm going to flip up the screen share again, and I'm just going to kind of show you what that fourth column looks like. So the first prompt that I use comes from the top of page 67 when it says, they like ourselves were sick too. And what I can do is I can go point by point in the second column and ask myself, have I done these things? So I'm resentful at this person for stealing at me, from me. Have I ever stolen from anyone? And have I ever stolen from them? You know what I mean? Have I done these things? And Oftentimes that just, man, if you're working with a sponsee who's really guarded and who's really defended, that is a prompt that really helps open them up to seeing where they've made some mistakes. You know what I mean? And then if we go back to page 62, and on page 62, it talks about how it's that first full paragraph, selfishness, self-centeredness, where it talks about, we step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate. Sometimes they hurt us seemingly without provocation. I just minding my own business, living my life, and out of nowhere, they came and caused me harm. But it says, but we invariably, which is pretty well always, find that at some time in the past, we've made decisions based on self, which later placed us in a position to be hurt. So before the resentment happened, where did I make a selfish, a self-centered, a self-seeking decision that put myself in a position to be hurt before the resentment? And then I get into the prompts of where was I selfish? Not was I selfish, assume I was, but where? And here are some examples of what I found, like just experientially me writing a lot of inventory about me. Where can I be selfish? Well, I start playing God. I start wanting to control others, control the outcome, thinking I know what's best, being inconsiderate of others, being, that selfishness where it's all about me and what I can get. Oftentimes that selfishness looks like I've created a rule book and I expect other people to follow it. You know what I'm saying? Oftentimes that's what my selfishness kind of looks like, or some examples of selfishness. Where was I dishonest? So assume I was dishonest and I look for where. Now, of course, there's stealing and manipulating, but there's other forms of dishonesty that I've really been able to see when I take that prompt of where was I? Some examples of dishonesty is, in your gut when you need to say no, but you say yes anyways. Those situations where you don't communicate because you're afraid. Those situations where you take too much on, or maybe those walls and masks and that like ego and image I'm trying to present to the world so that people like me and I don't tell the truth. Those are examples of dishonesty. And then assume I was self-seeking. I was. Look for where. And I'll tell you where a lot of self-seeking looks like for me. Of course, it looks like me trying to get my way. I got a way. I want to get it, But what it also, wonderful speaker, Sandy Beach, if you're ever wondering, how do you overcome that trying to get your own way, here's the secret. Don't have a way. And then you don't got to worry about getting it. But where was I self-seeking? So that self-seeking, often in my experience, it looks like I'm seeking my sense of worth, my sense of value, my sense of validation from others. And I can look for those sorts of things from work, from success, from being seen as a good person, a good AI. I'm seeking from others so that they like me and think well of me. I'm sure I'm the only one here who has that need to be right. But you see, I can't be right in a vacuum. I need y'all to agree with me. So it's not just that I need to be right, but I also need to be seen as right. And I'm self-seeking that. I don't know about you, but some other examples is like judgment, criticism, gossip. And what I'm trying to do is I'm showing up to life with this feeling of who I am is not enough. And I'm going to act on those things to give myself a boost of better than ego so I feel better for a moment, but I end up feeling worse. See, I don't know about you, but I'll create a hierarchy of human beings in my mind. I'm going to put myself near the bottom and I'm going to do things to try to pump myself up to the top, right? And those are some examples of where, self-seeking has just run me. And where was I afraid? And a lot of those fears, fear of rejection, abandonment, fear that being alone, fear that no one will ever love me, fear of conflict, fear of confrontation, fear of communication, then there's so many more, fear of success, fear of failure, all of those fears, we're going to write them down. And when we get to our very next section, fears, what we're going to do is we're going to take those specific fears into our fear inventory. And of course, we can add other ones. Of course, like with resentments, we can look up a prompt sheet, but it makes sense if these fears are driving me to have resentments, it makes sense that I would then need to be free of them. Does that make sense? And so what can be one of the things that can kind of be a little conceptually tricky is that decisions based on self, which later put us in a position to be hurt. So this is where I find it really helpful to pop over to page 65. And so let's go and have a look at this example and see what it would look like. Now, if I was taking a sponsee through this, I would go from the bottom to the top. So I would go wife, employer, Jones, Brown. That's how I would work it back to front. But just to keep things simple, we're going to start front to back. And so here's our first jerk, page 65, Mr. Brown. I spoke at this conference out in Medicine Hat, and they had these little mugs that said Mr. Brown needs to get his ass kicked. I'm like, delightful. All right, Mr. Brown, the cause, his attention to my wife. And that affects my sex relations, self-esteem. He also, how dare we, told my wife of my mistress. That's going to affect sex relations, self-esteem, in brackets, fear. And Brown may get my job at the office. Security, self-esteem, in brackets, fear. Now, keep in mind, I would write this inventory. Mr. Brown, flip the page. Miss Jones, flip the page. My employer, flip the page. My wife, flip the page. And then do all of column 2 for each and every one. Then go back and do all of column 3. But just for the purposes of reading, I'm going to read across. All right, now, before I get into it, I got to say the prayer. So how I would say it is, God, help me to show Mr. Brown the same pity, patience, and tolerance that I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. Mr. Brown is a sick man. How can I be helpful to him? God, save me from being angry. Thy will, not mine, be done. So now, if I take a look at that prompt, where did I make a decision based on self, which later put me in a position to be hurt? I'm going to say some things that might seem a little revolutionary. Is it possible that by chance it might be a little selfish and self-centered to have a mistress? And if I don't have a mistress, Mr. Brown has nothing to tell my wife. And here's the deal. I'll be frank with you guys. I'm an alcoholic. I don't have one mistress. I have 2. And what I mean by that is I have the mistress. We should give her a name at some point. I love in the chat, perhaps. We're not going to say for sure, but perhaps. But I don't just have the mistress that is my mistress. What I also have is my mistress who is alcohol. That's my other mistress. And so when it says Mr. Brown's attention to my wife, is it possible that because I have a mistress and because I'm spending all my time and my energy drinking and using drugs and doing all that sort of stuff, I am not giving my wife any care and attention? And if I didn't have a mistress, Mr. Brown would have nothing to tell my wife. And if I gave her the care and attention that I perhaps probably promised during some wedding vows, is it possible that he would not have space to give her any attention? Is that, and let's be real. Oftentimes when I'm doing things, I'm sure I'm the only one that can relate to this. So I'll just speak for me and no one else. Is it possible that when I do things I shouldn't do, I maybe have a little bit of projection and I blame people for things that I'm doing? I've never. And then when it says Mr. Brown may get my job at the office. Now we're going to see in a couple resentments. Mr. Brown, or I have not been, Mr. Brown, he's probably showing up to work sober and on time and doing his job. And I don't know about you guys. I'm not showing up to work. If I'm showing up to work, just in the chat. I'm not saying it's your fault. I'm just, we got a lot of Mr. Brown needs his ass kicked code on the chat. We got, I'm not saying it's your fault. I'm just saying I'm blaming you. Yeah, that's the approach we're taking with Mr. Brown. I'm admitting he may be somewhat at fault. He is sure that other people are more to blame. Big book tie-in. I'm retired. I love it. But what's happened is I'm showing up drunk or hungover, if at all. And and I'm not a good employee. We're really going to get into that. And if I was showing up and honoring the commitments that I had made, is it possible that I would not have this resentment with Mr. Brown? So again, we're looking at before. Now let's have a look at Miss Jones. Listen, Miss Jones, she's a nut. She stabbed me. Can you believe this? She stabbed me. She committed her husband for drinking. He's my friend. She's a gossip. And that's going to affect our personal relationship, self-esteem, and in brackets, fear. And so what are we going to do? Well, before we do anything else, what we're going to do is we're going to say prayer. We're going to say a prayer for Miss Jones, and we're going to say the 67. Well, we're not saying a prayer for Miss Jones, but we're saying this, the resentment prayer. And what we're saying is, God, help me to show Miss Jones the same pity, patience, and tolerance that we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. Miss Jones is a sick person. How can I be helpful to her? God save me from being angry. Thy will, not mine, be done. Now, if I have a look, listen, at where I might have made a decision based on self, which later put me in a position to be hurt, when it says she's a gossip, I wonder if I have some things going on in my life for which she could easily gossip about. The mistress. That's probably what I'm worried about her gossiping about. You know what I mean? The mistress. And then when it talks about she committed her husband for drinking, he's my friend. Well, her husband had to get committed for his alcoholism. His alcoholism is so serious that he had to be locked away. And that is not an easy decision. That was a decision at that time, like his quality of life was not going to be good. And I am so selfish and so self-centered, I cannot consider what her and her family and her husband was going through. All I can think about is I want my drinking buddy back. I don't think about the family. And you know what's again, I don't know what sort of drinkers you are, but I was probably showing up, Miss Jones, just drunk, drinking in the living room with the husband, like, wow, yeah, having a great time, breaking the furniture, you know, like just ruining. Like I'm being an active agent in the destruction of her family. Do you know what I mean? And then I'm like, how dare she snap me? Do you know what I mean? Oh, I am sensitive. If you're wondering what sensitive means, that means self-centered. You know what I mean? How dare she snub me? And she's probably a nut, like telling me not to piss my pants on her couch. You know what I mean? Or not get hammered with her husband who's dying of alcoholism. What a nut. Also, I'm just going to throw it out there. I might not be the best influence on her husband with the whole mistress thing, and she might not be jazzed that we're spending so much time together because of that. Does that kind of make sense? Does that kind of follow? You know what I mean? And then we got my employer. My employer, again, unreasonable, unjust, overbearing, threatens to fire me for padding my expense account. Now that's going to affect my self-esteem in brackets fear, security. So I got to say the prayer. God, help me to show my employer the same pity, patience, and tolerance that I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. My employer is a sick person. How can I be helpful to him? God, save me from being angry. Thy will, not mine, be done. Now, let me have a look. Is it possible that maybe as an alcoholic, I might not be the best employee and that my employer is unreasonable, unjust, and overbearing because he's asking some really outrageous things, like I show up on time, sober, or at least not hungover, and like do the job I was expected to do? God, and he's going to ask me to do that like every day. I'm supposed to call in and like do it. Oh, just unreasonable and unjust and so overbearing. And then also when it talks about threatens to fire me for padding my expense account, if you're not sure, listen, I was not ever somebody that was given an expense account, and that is probably a blessing, although I might have gotten here with you guys sooner. But if you're wondering what padding your expense account is, that is theft. I am actively stealing from the company and just, so unreasonable and unjust as I'm stealing from them. All right. And then we got the wife. So I got my wife and she misunderstands and nags, likes brown, wants house put in her name. And that's going to affect my pride, my personal relations, my security, and brackets, fear. No worries, glad you came. And so what we're going to do is we're going to say a prayer. So God, help me to show my wife the same pity, patience, and tolerance that I would cheerfully grant a sick friend. My wife is a sick person. How can I be helpful to her? God, save me from being angry. Thy will, not mine, and thy will, not mine, be done. And so I wonder what my wife would have to misunderstand and nag about. Perhaps the mistress. Perhaps again, not one mistress, but two. The mistress that is alcohol. the mistress that I am spending my time and my energy on, and that is ruining her life and the household that we've built together. Perhaps that's something that she's, misunderstanding about and nagging about. Likes Brown. Well, again, I'm not giving her any time or any attention. And if I am, I'm probably blackout hammered. I don't know what your relationships were like, but that's a little like me. And I would also, by the way, this is me. I would go like missing. I would just be like gone for extended period. Oh, Clancy. Oh, sorry. I might not. It was Clancy, not Chuck. Okay, fair. No worries. God, that was some ADHD. All right. And then wants house put in her name. Now, a lot of times when we approach this book, we want to contextualize it in the era of the 1930s. And I actually find a lot of times when we do that, it's more harmful than helpful. But in this case, it can be quite helpful. This is one of the few cases where I can find it really helpful to contextualize in the 1930s. And in the 1930s, it was not common for a woman to be able to work. And this is an alcoholic who is oh, I see what's happened in the chat. I see. So sometimes I don't always catch things. And I'm like, oh, okay, there's Clancy, there's Chuck. I'm like, I don't know, some handsome fellas in the chat. Don't you miss them? Anywho, sorry, we're at the time. Okay, so wants house put in her name. She doesn't have the ability to earn an income, and I am not living up to the responsibilities that I said I would. When I committed to this marriage and the commitment. And she probably wants that house put in her name so that, hey, no worries, thanks for coming. She probably wants that house put in her name so that she can take care of herself and have something to survive by, because I haven't lived up to my responsibilities. So when we do that, we begin to see the truth about who we are. And we got these fears. And next week, what we're going to do is we're going to rock and roll into those fears, those exact same fears, and we'll add some, of course, that we're driving our resentments. And then we'll figure out how to get some freedom from them. Spoilers, God. Join us next week. Okay.